My beloved child, do not rush past these words. Pause here for a moment, because what you are about to hear was meant to find you at a very specific point in your journey. There is a reason your attention was pulled toward this message when it was. There is a reason something inside you hesitated before moving on. In this fictional spiritual story, imagine heaven drawing close, not with fear, not with punishment, but with the quiet urgency of a door that has been left open only long enough for truth to finally enter. Something has been building in the heart of the person you think about, and what began as silence has now become almost impossible for them to carry. They have reached a point where pretending they feel nothing is no longer working. They have reached a point where distance is no longer protecting them. And behind everything they have not said, one desperate thought has been growing stronger: I hope they understand before I lose the chance to explain. You may have sensed a shift without knowing what caused it. A strange heaviness. A sudden memory. Their face crossing your mind at the most unexpected time. A feeling that something unfinished is still breathing beneath the silence. Perhaps you dismissed it. Perhaps you told yourself not to read into it. Perhaps you have been trying to protect your heart by assuming that if someone truly cared, they would simply speak. But this story is not about simple emotions. It is about a person who has spent too long fighting what their own heart has already admitted. And tonight, something inside them is different. The walls that once made them feel safe have begun to feel like a prison. The excuses they once trusted no longer comfort them. The distractions they used to avoid thinking of you have lost their power. They are beginning to understand that silence has a cost, and they are terrified that the cost may be you. There is something they wish they could place directly into your hands right now. Not a perfect speech. Not a dramatic promise. Not an explanation designed to erase everything that has happened. What they wish they could give you is the truth without fear wrapped around it. Because fear has shaped more of their choices than you realize. Fear of rejection. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of showing you how deeply you affected them. Fear of admitting that even while they appeared distant, a part of them was still turning toward you. They did not expect this connection to reach beneath their defenses. They did not expect your absence to become louder than your presence once was. And they certainly did not expect the moment when they would finally look at their own behavior and realize, with a shock they could no longer deny, that they may have pushed away the very person they never truly wanted to lose. That realization did not arrive gently. It came through small moments first. A quiet evening when no one else could distract them. A song that reminded them of something they never told you. A conversation where someone unknowingly described the kind of connection they had been trying to escape. A moment when they reached for their phone and stopped themselves. Another moment when they almost typed your name. Another when they wondered whether you had finally stopped waiting for anything from them. And with every small moment, the truth became sharper. What if you are no longer standing where they left you? What if you have finally chosen peace over confusion? What if someone else recognizes what they were too frightened to honor? That is where the urgency begins. Because they are no longer only thinking about what happened between you. They are thinking about what could happen without them. They are imagining your life moving forward, and for the first time, they are understanding that they may not automatically have a place in it. That thought has shaken them more deeply than they would ever admit aloud. They had grown accustomed to believing the connection would somehow remain available. Even through silence. Even through distance. Even through uncertainty. They thought there would always be another moment, another chance, another day when they could finally explain themselves. But something has changed their perception of time. They are beginning to understand that hearts do not wait forever in the same place. People heal. People grow. People stop chasing explanations. People eventually choose what chooses them back. And this is the part they wish you knew before anything else. Their hesitation was not always a lack of feeling. In fact, in this story, it was often the opposite. There were moments when they pulled away because the intensity frightened them. There were times when they became quiet because they did not know how to speak without revealing too much. There were moments when they acted indifferent because admitting the truth would have required them to confront parts of themselves they had avoided for years. You awakened questions inside them that had nothing to do with romance alone. You made them wonder why they run when something becomes real. Why they distrust peace. Why they prepare for abandonment even when no one is leaving. Why they sometimes confuse emotional control with emotional strength. And instead of immediately facing those questions, they tried to outrun them. But the heart has a strange way of waiting at the destination. They could travel mentally in 100 directions, and somehow they kept arriving back at you. They could convince themselves they were fine, then hear your name and feel the entire argument collapse. They could tell themselves the timing was wrong, then imagine never having another opportunity and feel panic rise in their chest. They could say they needed distance, then secretly wonder why distance hurt more than closeness ever did. The contradiction became exhausting. And eventually, the person they were pretending to be could no longer hide the person they had become because of this connection. There is a conversation they keep imagining. In one version, they tell you everything. They admit that they were afraid. They admit that they noticed more than they ever showed. They tell you about the moments they almost reached out. They confess how many times they wondered whether you were thinking about them too. They apologize for the confusion. They try to explain that some of their coldest moments were born from emotional overwhelm, not cruelty. They tell you they were not prepared for the way you saw through them. Then they become quiet, because even in their imagination, there is one question they are afraid to ask. Do you still feel anything at all? That question is haunting them. Not because they expect you to wait forever. Not because they believe they are entitled to another chance. But because uncertainty has finally turned back on them. For so long, you may have been the one questioning. You may have wondered where you stood. You may have tried to interpret mixed signals, silence, delays, strange shifts in energy, moments of closeness followed by distance. Now the emotional mirror has turned. Now they are the one wondering what your silence means. Now they are the one imagining possibilities. Now they are the one feeling the weight of not knowing. And there is more. Something recently made this fear stronger. It may have been a conversation with someone close to them. Someone who challenged the story they had been telling themselves. Someone who looked at them and asked a simple question they were not prepared to answer. If this person matters so much, why are you acting like they don't? That question stayed with them. It followed them into silence. It resurfaced later when they were alone. At first, they tried to defend themselves. They had reasons. Complications. Timing. Pride. Past pain. Uncertainty. But one by one, every explanation began to sound smaller beside the possibility of losing you completely. Then came another realization. They have been waiting for certainty before taking a step, but certainty was never going to come first. Courage had to. That realization has changed something in them. For the first time, they are beginning to understand that real connection does not always arrive when life is neat. Sometimes it appears while people are still healing. Sometimes it exposes insecurities before it brings comfort. Sometimes it forces a person to decide whether they would rather remain emotionally protected or become emotionally honest. They have been choosing protection. They thought it would keep them safe. Instead, it has left them restless. And now, the message inside them is becoming clearer. Please do not misunderstand my silence. Please do not believe you meant nothing. Please do not let the worst version of my fear become the only version of me you remember. They wish they could tell you that there were nights when they replayed conversations with you long after they ended. They remember things you probably assumed they forgot. A certain look. A certain tone. Something you said casually that stayed with them because it revealed the kind of heart you have. There are details they never acknowledged because acknowledging them would have exposed how closely they had been paying attention. They noticed when you were trying to appear stronger than you felt. They noticed when your energy changed. They noticed when your responses became shorter. They noticed the exact point when your warmth began to protect itself. And that last part is what frightens them now. Because they know they helped cause it. There is no easy way for them to escape that truth. They can no longer blame timing for everything. They can no longer pretend you were asking too much if what you were really asking for was clarity. They can no longer tell themselves you would understand forever without communication. Something inside them has matured enough to recognize that care without expression can feel exactly like absence to the person receiving it. That realization has brought regret. But not the kind of regret that simply looks backward. This regret is trying to become a decision. They are asking themselves what they can still do while there is still something left to save. They are wondering whether honesty now would matter. They are wondering whether one sincere message could open a door that pride nearly closed. They are wondering whether you would hear them if they finally spoke without defenses, and here is where the emotional energy changes again. Because someone may have recently mentioned you to them. Not in the way they expected. Your name entered a conversation, and they tried to remain composed. But something was said that struck directly at the fear they had been hiding. Perhaps someone suggested you were moving on. Perhaps someone casually mentioned that you seemed different lately. Perhaps they heard that you were focusing on yourself, becoming more peaceful, less emotionally available to confusion. Whatever the exact detail was in this fictional story, it made them suddenly realize that your world has continued to move even while they were undecided. They felt it immediately. That sharp internal drop. The feeling of time no longer being under their control. And that is when their thoughts stopped sounding calm. What if I waited too long? What if they no longer believe me? What if they meet someone who is not afraid to give them what I kept hiding? What if the lesson arrives only after the person is gone? These questions have begun to follow them everywhere. But heaven, in this story, is not revealing this to make you anxious. The deeper message is not that you must chase them, rescue them, or reopen any door that harmed your peace. The deeper message is about truth arriving where assumption once lived. You are being shown that silence does not always contain the answer you think it does. Sometimes the person who appears unaffected is fighting an internal battle you cannot see. Sometimes distance creates clarity. Sometimes losing access to someone's warmth teaches a person what they were receiving all along. And you, my child, have changed too. This may be the part they are least prepared for. You are not standing in exactly the same emotional place anymore. Even if you still care, something within you has become wiser. You are beginning to understand that love cannot only be measured by intensity. It must also be measured by consistency, courage, respect, truth, and emotional responsibility. You are beginning to recognize the difference between a connection that feels powerful and a connection that knows how to become safe. This growth has shifted your energy. You may not even realize how visible it has become. But they feel it. They sense that you are less willing to abandon yourself just to preserve a bond. They sense that the version of you who once would have accepted almost any explanation is no longer here. They sense boundaries growing where confusion once lived. And strangely, this is not pushing them farther away. It is waking them up. Because when they imagined you always being emotionally available, they could postpone courage. Now that they feel the possibility of truly losing access to your heart, everything they avoided has become urgent. Your growth has become the mirror they needed. There is another secret behind their desperation to be understood. They are carrying something they never told you because they feared it would make them look weak. At some point, they tried to convince themselves that what they felt for you would fade if they simply gave it enough time. They expected distance to solve it. They thought days would turn you into a memory. They believed new routines, new conversations, new distractions, maybe even new attention from others, would reduce the emotional hold this connection had on them. But that is not what happened. The noise changed. The feeling did not. In some ways, it became clearer. Without constant interaction, they could no longer blame the intensity on proximity. Without recent conversations, they could no longer say they were simply caught in the moment. When enough time passed and you were still entering their thoughts, they had to confront the possibility that this meant more to them than they were willing to admit. That frightened them. Because if the feeling was real, then their choices mattered. If the connection was meaningful, then their silence mattered. If you were truly important, then the way they handled you mattered. They began reviewing moments differently. They remembered times when you offered sincerity and they answered with uncertainty. Times when you gave patience and they gave mixed signals. Times when you tried to understand them and they hid behind emotional walls. Things that once seemed small now look different through the lens of possible loss. They wish they could return to certain moments. Not to rewrite the entire story. Just to say one sentence differently. To stay on the phone a little longer. To answer the message instead of staring at it. To tell you not to take their fear personally. To admit that they cared before pride made everything complicated. But time does not move backward. And that is why their next step matters. There is something forming. Not fully visible yet. Not certain enough to reveal all at once. But forming. A message. A confession. A decision. They have considered reaching out more than once recently. They have written things and deleted them. They have imagined how you might respond. They have rehearsed explanations that sounded too complicated and erased them. Then, eventually, they began reducing everything to the truth. I miss you. I handled this badly. I was scared. You mattered more than I let you see. I do not know if I still have a chance to make this right. That is where their heart keeps returning. Simple truth. And there is something powerful about that because for so long, complexity helped them hide. If they could make the situation complicated enough, they never had to admit what was simple underneath it. They cared. They were afraid. They hesitated. They may now regret that hesitation. But before you imagine that this automatically means reunion, there is a deeper spiritual lesson unfolding. Not every return is restoration. Not every confession is transformation. Words may open a door, but actions reveal whether someone has actually changed. And somewhere inside you, you already know this. That is why the message you are receiving in this fictional spiritual moment is not "run back." It is "listen with wisdom." If they come forward, listen to what has changed, not only to what they say they feel. Listen for accountability. Listen for clarity. Listen for whether they are willing to meet you in the emotional truth they once avoided. You are not being asked to become cold. You are being invited to become discerning. Because something about your heart has always been generous. Maybe too generous at times. You can see potential. You can sense the wounded part behind someone's behavior. You can understand why people do what they do. But understanding someone is not the same as being required to accept anything from them. Compassion and boundaries can exist together. And this is something they may finally be realizing too. They may have assumed your kindness meant endless access. They are learning otherwise. They may have assumed your patience meant you would always remain available. They are learning otherwise. They may have mistaken your deep feelings for weakness. They are beginning to understand that your ability to love deeply may actually be the reason you finally choose yourself deeply too. That possibility is changing their behavior behind the scenes. They are becoming more serious. More reflective. Less interested in pretending. And one particular moment may soon push everything forward. There is a choice approaching them. A choice between maintaining their pride and risking vulnerability. They will not be able to stand in the middle forever. Something is pressuring that decision. It could be an upcoming event, a conversation, a realization, the possibility of you moving forward without them. But the emotional deadline they feel is real inside this story. Not because heaven is threatening them. Because life is teaching them that unspoken love eventually becomes a missed opportunity if no one has the courage to translate it into action. They are beginning to understand that you cannot respond to feelings you were never allowed to see. That sentence changed something in them. Because suddenly they saw your perspective. They saw themselves through your eyes. Imagine waiting for clarity from someone who kept hiding it. Imagine wondering whether you mattered while that person privately thought about you constantly. Imagine being expected to trust something that was rarely spoken. Imagine carrying emotional uncertainty while the other person told themselves they were protecting the connection by staying silent. They finally saw how unfair that could feel. And it humbled them. Something softened after that. The defensiveness weakened. The excuses stopped sounding convincing. And what remained was a simple desire to tell you the truth before the story closes without them ever trying. There may even be a person around them who knows more than you think. Someone they confided in indirectly. They may not have said your name at first. They may have described someone who affected them. Someone they cannot quite move past. Someone they hurt through confusion. Someone they fear may be slipping away. But the person listening understood. And that person gave them advice they did not expect. Stop waiting for the perfect moment. Tell the truth while the truth can still matter. Those words landed heavily. Because the person you think of has been waiting for perfect conditions that may never exist. They wanted certainty that you still cared. They wanted proof that you would respond warmly. They wanted some sign that vulnerability would be safe. But love does not always provide guarantees before courage. Sometimes courage is the price of finding out. And this is where the mystery deepens. Because while they are preparing emotionally to speak, something else is happening inside you. You are being prepared to hear differently. You are not the same person who once needed the outcome to go a specific way. A deeper strength has been forming beneath your longing. You may still want answers. You may still feel tenderness when you think of them. But there is a growing part of you that knows you will be okay whether they come forward or not. That strength is important, because it means if truth arrives, you can receive it without losing yourself inside it. You can hear an apology without immediately erasing the past. You can hear, "I miss you," without forgetting what consistency means. You can hear, "I was afraid," while still asking whether they have learned how to act differently. You can love someone and still require emotional maturity. And that is why the timing of this revelation matters. Because the next chapter cannot be built from the same version of both of you. If there is to be movement, something must be different. Their courage. Your boundaries. Their honesty. Your discernment. Their willingness to show up. Your refusal to shrink. Something must rise. And perhaps it already is. There is an image they cannot stop imagining lately. You walking away without anger. That image frightens them more than any argument ever could. Because anger would mean emotional attachment still has somewhere to go. But peace? Peace means you may have stopped fighting reality. Peace means you may no longer need them to understand what they did. Peace means you might be able to bless the lesson and keep moving. They sense that possibility. And it has changed the urgency of their thoughts. They are no longer asking only, "Do I love them?" They are asking, "Am I willing to become honest enough to love them well?" That is a different question. And the answer is forcing them to look at themselves. They are seeing habits they never wanted to admit. Avoidance. Pride. Emotional inconsistency. The tendency to retreat when vulnerability becomes real. The instinct to wait until they feel completely safe before offering someone else safety. But they are also seeing something hopeful. They can choose differently. Maybe not perfectly, but differently. And that is the quiet transformation beginning behind the scenes. Do not mistake transformation for completion, though. They are still afraid. They still wonder whether you will reject them. They still fear you may have heard too many words and seen too few actions. They still worry that the timing may be unforgivable. But fear is no longer completely controlling them. Something stronger is rising beside it. The desire to know they at least told you the truth. That is why this message carries urgency. Not doom. Not panic. Urgency. There is a difference. Doom says you are powerless. Urgency says a choice matters. Panic says force the outcome. Urgency says stop pretending you have forever. And in this story, your soulmate is beginning to understand that lesson. They know they cannot demand your heart. They know they cannot undo the past. They know they cannot decide for you. But they can decide whether they continue hiding. And that decision may be closer than you think. There is one sentence they have not yet found the courage to send. One sentence that would reveal more than all the explanations combined. They have started it more than once. Deleted it more than once. Changed the wording. Stared at it. Closed the phone. Opened it again. And every time they stop, their heart returns to the same fear. What if this is my last real chance to tell them? The sentence begins with your name. Then comes a pause. Then the confession. Not the confession you expect. Something deeper. Something connected to the real reason they pulled away. Something they have never admitted to anyone in exactly this form. And if they finally send it, you will understand why their silence became so intense just when the connection seemed strongest. Because the truth is, they were not only afraid of losing you. They were afraid of what loving you was forcing them to face inside themselves. And the part they are about to reveal may change the entire meaning of everything that happened between you. But before that truth can reach you, there is one final choice they must make. And tonight, they are standing closer to that choice than ever before.